Hi, I'm James Naylor Green, professor of Brazilian history and culture at Brown University and the national co-creator of the U.S. Network for Democracy in Brazil. This program is supported by the Washington, Brazil office. This is Brazil Unfiltered. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing Rafael Alcadipani, who is full professor of management at the Sao Paulo Management School of the Fundação Getulio Vargas. He received his PhD in management from the University of Manchester, United Kingdom. He does research on police and crime in Brazil. He has published widely in top academic journals. Professor Alcadipani also writes for non-academic outlets in Brazil and has been called by Brazilian and international media outlets to discuss issues associated with police and crime in Brazil, including Reuters, BBC, Al Jazeera, and the Wall Street Journal, to mention just a few. He was a visiting scholar at Boston College, the Gothenburg University, and the Paris Dauphine University. Rafael, welcome to Brazil Unfiltered.
Thank you, James. Thank you for having me here. It's a big pleasure to discuss so relevant issues for Brazilians and for people worldwide.
So let's jump right in. You are part of the Brazilian Forum on Public Security, an organization that publishes a renowned annual report on the state of public security in Brazil. Can you tell our listeners a bit about the forum and its activities?
Yes, the forum is an association between academics and practitioners, people that work in academia like me, researchers, professors, and also people who work on the streets, police officers, people who are in government dealing with public safety. So this is an association, and one of the key things that the forum makes is the statistics of violence in Brazil, because there is no reliable source, governmental source of statistics of violence in Brazil, which can show the problem or the size of the problem of violence and crime in Brazil, that we need to have an NGO to do this type of statistics. And so we produce the most reliable source of data about crime and criminality in Brazil every year.
So why is the government not able to produce reliable statistics?
Well, I think that's a big issue. It seems to me that public safety and crime in Brazil is not managed in a professional way. I think it's a lot of politics on it, and they keep doing stuff. And President Bolsonaro was an example of it. I think also President Lula and some of the people who are working with President Lula has also this type of wisdom, which is this idea of being tough to crime. You have to be tough to crime. You have to, this all the war language about it, but they don't do the basics. Like have, for example, a clear up statistics about homicides in the country. The Brazil doesn't produce this type of statistics, and even murders. Even though the Brazilian Forum of Public Safety, we get information, we send message to the governments, and we use the Freedom of Information Act, the Brazilian Freedom of Information Act, to get the information, but the government itself is unable to do this simple work. Because in my point of view, it's a lack of interest in the theme, and it's also, there is a huge ideological clouds on it, which makes the basic things not to be done right.
So what were the highlights of the 2023 report?
Well, I think one of the key issues that we show is that we have a decrease in murders, but it's a very small decrease of 2.4%. And most of the crimes are committed using guns. Most of those guns were legal guns that then they come to the black market. And then also it is a big issue. The other point is that we had an increase in 8.2% of rapes in the country. And we have to remember that rapes in Brazil and many places in the world, not only in Brazil, it takes place between people who have intimacy with the victim. Is an uncle, a stepfather. It's not something that there is this idea of the raper who is outside and gets the women on the street. That's not typical to happen. What typically happens to one who has proximity with the victim and making this crime to be very appalling and disgusting in a way. And also we have a huge increase. We had more than 1 million crimes committed by electronic means, like digital crimes. This is happening all over the world, but in Brazil, this is, it's impressive how much of those crimes have increased, especially after the pandemic, but has been increasing with the widespread use of mobile phones in the country.
Yeah, I must admit, living in Sao Paulo, in 2022, I had to be very careful. My cell phone was almost stolen twice in the Praça da República. So it's really an issue that many people feel in the country. So at the start of 24, Lula appointed Supreme Court Justice Ricardo Lewandowski to be the new Minister of Justice and Public Security, replacing Flávio Dino, who was appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, he has promised to prioritize public security. What can we expect in terms of public policies for the new minister?
Oh, I think it's still very early to know what's going to happen. I think Ricardo Lewandowski, he has a more, I would say, a more discreet profile than Flávio Dino. And also he has been a judge for many years, so he knows how to navigate with police forces and everything. There is another, on the flip side, there is an issue, which is, it's very unusual in the world to have someone who was a justice to become a minister of a government. Because I think it's quite problematic in terms of conflicts of interest and everything. I think ideally we would not have someone who was a judge or justice, who was a member of the Supreme Court to become a minister, which also shows a huge problem of governance in the Brazilian system. When we are talking about public safety and we are talking about institutions in the country, we allow so many things like this to happen, which makes the governance of the system very delicate and very complicated. And also because Minister Lewandowski, he was a key figure in the car wash not investigations, but also making decisions on the Supreme Court. The car wash investigation was the investigation against Lula when he was a president and he was arrested because of those investigations. And then the Supreme Court overruled those decisions made by the first and second tier judges in the system. So the other side, because Brazil now is a divided country between Bolsonaro supporters and Lula supporters, and the Bolsonaro supporters sees that the Supreme Court had done something very bad, allowing Lula to run for presidency. So I don't think that putting the nomination of Lewandowski it's not a nomination that will reduce a little bit the polarization of the country, but I think it's a nomination that makes the polarization even stronger. And this has a lot to do with public safety and crime, because one of the places where the political game and the division of Brazil is played is around the agenda of fighting crime, because Bolsonaro had this very strong on him. So I don't know, because of this background, how he's going to be able to build a prolific and a proper policy on fighting crime in Brazil and on public safety. We need to see who he's going to choose to be the person who's going to work with him on this regard, because he's a Minister of Justice and Public Safety, so he has to have someone who will do it. And also crime, most of the crime law in Brazil and most of the crime investigations and dealing with crime is competence of the state, not of the nation, not of the federal government, but of the state governments. So he has a very important role on articulating those states to make a very good public safety policy, but he doesn't have the mandate to do it. So that's because he has to articulate, and I think Lewandowski has the profile and the possibility to speak to governors, even though it's very delicate yet. I think this polarization is very bad because it becomes a lenses by which everyone sees everything. And this makes a lot of bad things for proper public policy to develop and to happen. So I think this is the tension which I see in his nomination. My point of view, he's a better name for the position than Flávio Dino, but I think Flávio Dino was very, not because he's not competent, he is competent, and he played a very important role in the tentative of coup that we have in Brazil in the 8th of January when Lula just started office, and he was very strong and he did a very good job on it. But I think he was very outspoken and using of social media, so he doesn't have this discreet profile that Lewandowski has.
So let's address a little bit the most serious problem facing the combat of crime in Brazil, which is the expansion of organized crime. over the last 2 decades, which have become increasingly powerful and threatening. So I've been coming to Brazil for 45 years, living here many times during this 45 years, and I can really see the difference in the last 2 decades myself, observing the country. So what are the factors that explain this expansion in organized crime?
I think first is the fact that Brazil became one of the largest exporters of cocaine in the world. The Brazilian seaports and Brazilian airports are very important in this international drug trade. This is the first thing. The second thing is that many of those, we used to have many different organized crime gangs in Brazil. We still have, but we had two in particular which start to gain power. They start to control places. One is the Primeiro Comando da Capital, first command of the capital, that controls and has the monopoly of crime in the state of São Paulo. And the other one is the Red Commands, the Comando Vermelho, which is in Rio de Janeiro. And those are the three main gangs which are controlling the export of cocaine. And this become a very lucrative market. And when you concentrate so much the power of the crime, you start to get bigger and stronger and bigger and stronger. My point of view, PCC is almost a mafia. The way it's embedded in society, the way it's a mix between a Mexican cartel and an Italian mafia, which is very complicated to deal with. This is one thing. The second thing is that we haven't seen a reduction of social exclusion in Brazil over the last 20 years. Though the numbers show a very small change, but the state is not present as it should be, especially in the outskirts of the city where crime is more prevalent, where organized crime is more prevalent. And as people who study this subject says, where the state is not, crime is present, organizing society. So I think the poverty and mainly the inequality of Brazil and the lack of like economic growth with the distribution of income in the country has generated many more poor areas, and also this is also associated with the inability of the states to offer proper education, to offer proper sanitation, to offer proper health, and also this is a very important issue, to plan the city and to organize how the city grows, because then you have a place which is poor, is not organized, the streets are very small, very tiny, and it's very easy for the criminals to control those areas. Right? No, and I think on the top of that is that we do not have a proper governance system in the police in Brazil. The police and the institutions of public safety in Brazil, they are very, very easily contagiated by politics. For example, a member of parliament, of state parliaments, can nominate or informally nominate the head of police of a particular region. We had cases in Rio de Janeiro where police officers, even police officers who went to go to a specific neighborhood, they would have to be approved by a member of the city parliament. So, I mean, you cannot control it, right? You can't control it. And also, we have a police force which doesn't earn a lot of money. There are many issues, which is very corrupt as well. Because organized crime, it can only be prevalent because of police corruption in state, not only police, but many other state agents' corruption. So then you create like a perfect storm in the country for organized crime to grow. And organized crime in Brazil now is very, very, very strong. They are able to corrupt police officers. They are able to corrupt members of the judiciary systems. We have decisions made by even justices, people from the Supreme Court, which are completely no understandable at all. We had like a huge drug dealer who was released from the front door of the police. Of course, we cannot say that this is corruption, but we can suspect it is corruption. Mm. And also, we have a society which accepts crime in a way, right? So I think those are the key issues which explain how organized crime has grown in Brazil over. Oh, and there is another last issue. Sorry for keeping open brackets here, but another issue is that the way they choose to confront the criminals is not a way of intelligence, of following the money, getting the goods of those people, but it's going to make confrontation, putting police officers with machine guns invading areas, which is, I mean, which of course I'm not naive, and I do understand that sometimes you have to use the power of the states and you have to control areas by force, and police has the lethal power that sometimes, unfortunately, has to be used, but this cannot be the only way of fighting crimes, because you are putting the people down there and you are not going to the top of the hierarchy. And now when I said crimes are very important, they're like electing members of parliament. And I'm very concerned about the future of Brazil, given the power of criminals in the country. I always say that I think the key challenge for Brazilian democracy is organized crime. Brazilian institutions by political, we can control it, like we did the coup attempt, which was disgusting, but the institutions at the end of the day, they worked well. But what happens when the democracy is being infiltrated by organized crime, as we have seen, for example, in Ecuador?
It's very, very worrisome for those who study Brazil, who love Brazil, who live in Brazil. So the war on drugs narrative has been recurrent in discourses of security in the country. Do you see this narrative losing steam after decades of failure? And connected to that, I'm really specifically concerned about, for example, how to deal with crises in Brazil and urban areas such as Cracolândia in Sao Paulo, where there's thousands of people using crack cocaine and living on the streets of the city. How does one address the issue in a positive way?
Well, I think, I don't think Brazil still has gotten to the position where they understand, or typical Brazilians understand that war on crime is a mistake, right? I think we are a very conservative society. People, usually foreigners, see Brazilians dancing in Carnival and believe that Brazil is a very open-minded, easygoing society. No, 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 no. We are very narrow-minded. We are extremely conservative. And this question on drugs, I mean, it's a very almost a taboo here. So I think it's very difficult for this to be accepted. But I think the world is going in the direction of legalizing drugs, especially marijuana, right? I mean, we'll see even conservative states in the United States legalizing the use of recreational marijuana, which is also, I have to say, that's in practice legalized in Brazil. We can see people smoking on the beat. Everywhere you go, you can find people smoking, nothing happened to them, because the police has no way to enforce it in a question. So I think it might take some more 5-10 years, but I think marijuana is going to be legalized in Brazil in a way. But the big issue is cocaine, right? Cocaine is the key issue, and no one has developed satisfactory legalization policy or acceptance policy of cocaine because of, there are huge issues with that. We would need to have like a strong player like Europe or the United States to foster this agenda and to defend this, even though I don't see it happening soon, right? And I think we could do in Brazil more is like decriminalize the use of drugs. I think this could be something that's in the direction. And more important, I think they need to have in the law, stated by the law, how much is the difference between the possession and the dealer, Because now it's the police officer and the judiciary system that decides it. And this makes that a lot of the same amounts of cocaine that's when is encountered by police officers with someone from the poor areas, from a black guy, would make that he's a dealer the same amount if he's a white guy in a posh area, it wouldn't make that this person's a dealer. So I think this is a big issue for us. This would be a simple thing to do. Areas like Cracolândia, I think they're very extremely difficult to deal with. It has been taking ages, and it's happening and growing over and over again. I think there's no easy solution for that. We would need to have, I think Cracolândia is the results of an unequal country that doesn't deal well with your population. Because in many places, when you start to become addicted to drugs, you would get, like, the state would help you in the early stages when you are addicted to drugs. But this does not happen in Brazil, which means that people will end up in those areas. We had seen Cracolândias in Frankfurt, in San Francisco, and those cities have dealt with it. But I think think that the key issue for me is the lack of professionalism on dealing with problems. Here, the politics, and I mean, every year, every 2 years, we have elections. So all this small politics gets a lot on the way. And people like, for example, in Sao Paulo now, we as public safety secretary, we have a guy who used to be a member of parliament, and he's a very radical, I mean, tough on crime member of parliament, who unfortunately knows nothing on how to manage professionally a situation like Cracoland. He's much more concerned about getting likes on Instagram and social media than doing something on the long term. And this is another issue, which is we are not going to solve any of the Brazilian problems on criminality and also in Latin America on the short run. It takes years for doing it. Like Colombia, for example, has done developed something. So we have to have a policy, a public state policy, and we don't see it in Brazil. So I think this is a very, very problematic.
It will be very interesting. Guilherme Boulos of the Party of Socialism and Liberty is running for mayor with Marta Suplicy, a former mayor, as his running mate. And Lula is supporting this coalition, and Lula won the city of Sao Paulo. So if Boulos is elected, it's still very early to know what will happen in the elections at the end of the year, but it'll be very interesting to see if he can come up with something that's innovative and successful. I will be very frank, I've never seen anything more horrific than Cracolândia in my life. When I was there 4 or 5 years ago, it was just horrific to see the number of people, thousands and thousands of people who were in abject poverty, together in a small area. It was really, really shocking to me. So we'll see what can happen. But I think you're right that it needs to be long-term solutions and not short-term fixes, which are very much based on politics and the moment and responding to a constituency in order to be successful in the bid for an office. So I'm very curious to think about the question of the Bolsonaro administration and the way in which, like in the United States, they promoted gun ownership by citizens as a strategy against crime. How do you see that issue? What are the consequences of this approach to kind of addressing the issue of crime by arming the population?
If I may make a comments about Boulos, and I think he's very well articulated, very clever, and he might be elected. But I think he will continue to be in the polarization scope of it, and Cracolândia is one of the ways that the polarization, the politics is played. So I'm not. I hope you're right, but I think Tabata, who is running also, and she's younger. She has done her. I mean, he was educated in Harvard, and she comes from the outskirts, and I think she would have a more professional take on the thing. But we never know, you know. I think we have to go like in the US. I think we have to. One day we have to go away from this polarization, because this contaminates a lot on how things are. How things get on the thing, right?
And if I may comment, following what's happening in the United States and following what's happening in Brazil, I think this polarization is going to be here for a long time.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
And it's very depressing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So, but about the idea of arming the population as a strategy, that you know, the huge increase in the ownership of arms under the Bolsonaro government, the legalization of collectors possessing large numbers of guns or belonging to a gun club or being a recreational hunter allowed there to be this tremendous expansion in the numbers of arms that the citizens were possessing. So does this work against crime?
Well, I think there are 2 points before I can reply to your question. The first point is that it's very difficult to have a rational debate about guns, right? It's very difficult because people get very passionate about it and they don't think with their minds, you know. So it's very passionate. Second, myself, because I do a lot of research with the police, I personally like guns, like to shoot. I think it's an interesting thing, but I would never, ever, because of the science I know, consider myself carrying a gun on the streets, because it makes me far more. What the science says that makes me more unsafe than safer. Why? Guns are very good for attack, but they're very bad for defense. You might have the best gun in the world, and I may have a knife. If I get you by surprise, I can get your gun comes to me because I got you by surprise. So guns are very good for attack. They're extremely bad for defense, for self-defense, right? That's what science says, right? That's what science shows. I think this one was one of the largest mistakes in terms of public policy in Brazil, because we had a campaign of taking guns out of the streets over the like 10 years before Bolsonaro. And what happens is that because guns are very good for attack and very bad for defense, which means that he's renewing the arsenal of the criminals, because all those guns, they get stolen at some point and they go to the hand of the criminals.
Or sold.
Right. Oh, sold, yes. And there also the organized crimes, many of people were arrested because they were using the relaxation of the laws to buy lawfully guns for organized crimes. Right. So this is but the problem of this is that it's not something that we will see in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The consequence of this take times to happen, right? So in the next 5 or like after 5 or even 10 years, you will see all those guns going to bad hands, and this is going to impact. But there is another issue, which is very important to say, is that crime is always multi-factor. It's not just one factor that explains crime, even though guns is a factor that explains crime. You can see many countries in the world proportionally, when you have guns allowed, like in the United States or England, where you don't have guns allowed, or Australia, when you have restrictions for guns use, the levels of violence are much lower. Proportionally, of course, countries are bigger or larger. But in the US, it's complicated because this is like something that's in the Constitution. It's a different story, right? I mean, even though I think it's allowing someone to have a rifle, to buy a rifle is madness anyway, but it's another story. But I think that the consequence for Brazil is that we are having more guns on the streets. We're going to see, and we are seeing an increase of suicides because the guns are a proxy for suicide in the population. We are going to see more accidents with children, for example, because, those people believe that, no, I have a gun and I control. You don't control your gun. You don't store it safely, We cannot drive because we kill using our cars because you're reckless when you're driving. Why someone who is reckless driving is going to be very careful with the gun? It's impossible to control, right? So I think the consequence for public safety and crime is going to be very bad, but unfortunately, the relationship is not very clear and takes time to happen. So you can mobilize any discourse to say that's not was the cause.
There's also a very powerful gun lobby in Brazil and internationally of producing arms that, are sold here, and people make a lot of money and profit over that. So that's a consideration as well, I think. We talked about organized crime linked to drug trafficking and cocaine, but there's another phenomenon in Brazil that many foreign observers or people who are trying to learn about Brazil don't understand as well, which is the militias. Could you talk us a little bit about urban militias that are formed by police or former policemen and what they do, what their modus operandi is, and how they function within this landscape of crime and violence in a country?
Militias are typical of Rio de Janeiro and in the suburbs of Rio de Janeiro and some cities around this main city of Rio de Janeiro. And they are formed by police officers or ex-police officers who use the structure of the state to control a given area, a given population, and to charge them for using mobile phones, for collecting trash, for water, for everything. They charge the population. So the population become a hostage of this group, which is interesting because, and they were able to expel the drug dealers and they control the area, which is interesting in a way because the police officers do it informally, but they don't do it formally, right? They are able to organize and control the area when they are organized as criminals, but they are not able to do it when they are on duty, which is interesting in a way, right? So they control many areas and they have expelled, and this brought a lot of complexity to the Rio de Janeiro because you don't have only the drug dealers like we have in Brazil. In Sao Paulo, sorry, we have in Sao Paulo. In Sao Paulo, you have one drug that has the monopoly of drug dealing and the crime there. So at some extent, they control they rule the roost, and that's it. Whereas in Rio, have many different gangs and also have the militias as well. So, and they are very linked to politicians, members of parliaments, they're linked to governors. So this is very it makes an extra layer of complexity to one already very complex situation of Rio de Janeiro.
So there's another serious issue, which is appalling in certain places which is the situation of prisons in Brazil. Brazilian prison population has grown 257% since 2000, accompanied by more rebellions within institutions and gang wars within prisons. In recent years, there's been a campaign to privatize prisons as a solution to this situation. What is your view on that?
Oh, I don't think we have prisons in Brazil. What we have is revenge institutions, right? Society have a revenge of people who have committed crimes. That's what we have it. Because the water there is bad, the food is bad. In many of those institutions, people don't even have the rights to have a warm bath. They have to have bath in cold water. I mean, it's a place where the society is gonna to have a revenge of the person who was criminal, because that's the logics of Brazilians, is that you have make a crime, we're going to have a revenge against you, like the Italian law. It's almost Italian law, right? So it's not very popular to put money on the prison system. And I think the privatization is not solving any problem because the costs are much higher. But here, I think, James, we have one big issue in Brazil, which a lot helps to explain a lot the situation of crime in the country. We don't have a proper probation service, right? We don't have alternative penalties and probation in the country, which means that the person who is stealing my mobile phone here in front of my house, this person, if he's caught by the police on the spot of getting my mobile phone, he goes to the police station. Most probably, I will leave the station after the guy because of all the paperwork that has to be made, because you don't have a proper probation service. And this is one of the weakest link of Brazilian public safety system, because we don't arrest, and then we arrest the person and leave the person for many years, or the person is killed by police, which is another big issue here in Brazil, right? So the lack of a proper probation service and probation system in the country makes the prisons to be overpopulated and makes the system to be completely complicated. The question is, to put in place a decent probation services takes time and is very expensive. And I don't see the country putting the money or the investment necessary for that. I mean, when you see the statistics, you know, of course, the US is far from the best place in the world in the way it deals with criminality, but the probation is a big issue in the US, in the UK, in Germany, in many countries in the world, because you are able at least to interfere in the person when the person is starting the criminal career. If you don't have a probation service, you are going to pack the prisons with people. The flip side of the prison is that you arrest many people, but then the state is unable, because they don't invest in the system. They can't control the system. I mean, all prisons are controlled by criminals everywhere in the world, but in Brazil, because of the situation is so bad, those gangs are very powerful. So the state puts a lot of person in the prison, but these people who were there start to become members and become more radicalized inside the criminal gangs. So what we are doing at the end of the day is recruiting people to become members of organized crime, right? And there's another point which is important to make here, which is the typical Brazilian, the person on the streets, is not concerned about criminal gangs, because they don't interfere a lot in their lives. They don't see the people interfere. What they're concerned is about the property crime on the streets, right? They are, as you told, you almost was stolen twice when you were in Porta da República. This is happening every day, every time, everywhere. So what people get concerned is that they're paying a mobile phone installments, and the mobile phone gets stolen. But because we don't have a proper probation service, we are unable to deal with this guy who is doing this small crime. Not small because it's relevant anyway, but we are not able to deal with this person in particular. And this person goes, and then he goes develop, and then he starts to steal motorbikes, and then he starts to steal cars, and then he goes to rob a bank. So I think that's the trickiest issue. I think the prison issue in Brazil is just the surface of something much deeper, which is the inability of the states to deal with people who are in the criminal world. And also we have to say that crime is not I mean, of course we have people who become career criminals, but we have a lot of people here who crime is one of the side hustle that they do in their lives. For example, Brazil is a very equal society, so every building, almost rich building, have doormans and door people there. Those janitors and those people there, some of them may be selling drugs to the teenagers in the building. Some of the people we have a lot of delivery boys in motorbikes, as we have all over the world, food delivery and men of delivery. Those people do the delivery of foods, but they also sell drugs, for example. They also bought an stolen mobile phone and resell it. So, I mean, the borders between like the career criminal and the good citizen, as we say here in Brazil, right, are very blurred as well in the country.
So let's talk something internationally, if you will. Kind of give international context to what we're talking about. Ecuador has recently been shaken by violent events, including narco crime organizations, which are actually threatening the state itself. Do you have any thoughts about what's going on in Ecuador and what lessons we can learn in Brazil from what's happening there?
Well, I don't know a lot about Ecuador. I have spoken to some police officers there, some head of police some time ago, but I don't know. I know that's a very complex situation. I know that it's a large producer of cocaine. And I know that they took a privatization path in terms of public safety, which seems not to be working. But I mean, when you don't deal with organized crime, they're going to get you. It's simple. And they don't dealt with it. Mexico hasn't dealt with it. Brazil is not dealing with it. Ecuador hasn't dealt with it. For example, get a country that is, I mean, I think it's one of the best countries in South America, is Chile, right? Chile has a very strong policy against organized crime. They have two very good police institutions. I mean, the military police there has been involved in corruption. That's another story, but they're very efficient in how they deal with it, right? But Brazil is a neighbor, Ecuador also. And Ecuador, I mean, Brazil even is a big country. Ecuador is a small country. So when organized crime starts to control things, they start to have tentacles in the states. That's very complicated. I think Ecuador should be a wake-up call to South America, that we may be facing these type of things. I mean, of course, the situation in Ecuador is appalling because they are threatening the states. But in Brazil, we have naturalized the absurd. I mean, it's completely in Brazil. It's common game for criminals to go to a city, to storm a city, to shoot against the police, to leave the police in the station, to explode all banks in the city to get money. Where on earth would you allow this to happen? I mean, the situation in Brazil, I mean, you can be murdered literally because of your mobile phone in the next traffic lights that you face here. Would this be accepted even in the United States? Would it be accepted in the United States that a group of criminals storm a city and explode the city, and the police has no way to fight against it? Would this be accepted? Even, for example, I think the best country that has been the situation like Brazil and has changed this is Colombia. Colombia has, it's still, the problem is still huge, but it's much better now than it was 15, 20 years ago in Colombia. So I think Brazil has to decide if in the future it wants to be Colombia or Ecuador. And in the way it's going now, I think we are much more in the path of Ecuador than the path of Colombia.
You know, Rafael, we've discussed a lot of problems today, but what about some successes? In what aspects has public security improved in Brazil? Can we say it's improved in any way? Or is this only a bad story?
I mean, we had times when we had good stories. For example, in Rio de Janeiro, during a time, we had the pacification police units that when they would create a battalion of military police inside the areas, and they would take criminals out of it, and this would reduce confrontation with police. This would do a lot of good things to the community. But then we had to have the state had to get in the community and make the life of those people better, but the state failed to do it. We had the Pacto pela Vida in the Northeast, where the governor of state was having meetings constantly trying to reduce homicide, looking at homicide, because that's the one thing. Governors of states, they have to take this public safety situation in their hands. They have to have monthly meetings with people, try to control it. We had the reduction of homicides in Sao Paulo. Sao Paulo was a murder city about about 15, 20 years ago. And now Sao Paulo has lowest murder rates than Miami, than Chicago, than Baltimore, than many cities in the United States, because we had an articulation focusing on the solution of homicides, creating a homicide division, making NGOs go into those areas and trying to help those populations. So we do have some success story. Well, the unarmaments that we had in Brazil, the policy of taking guns out of the streets, it was successful. But you know what? Everything in life, devils are in the details and in the perseverance of it. So we have to have governors of state who look at the detail of public safety, and we have to have continuity. If we don't have continuity, if you don't have policies which are state policies for the future, those things don't prevail, and that's what happened. I think that's what happened in Brazil. We have some cities in Brazil when they have a very good. They're doing not very good, but they're improving a lot the way they care with women who suffer violence. Violence against women is a huge issue in Brazil. We usually talk about organized crime and murders, but violence against women is huge. Because you go to the countrysides of Sao Paulo, which is a very wealthy area where you don't have a lot of murders, where 99% of murders are solved, cleared up by the police, but have huge statistics of violence against women. And so some states are trying to develop some policies in terms of those women, when they go to the police station, they report the guy, the police looks after them, and if the guy gets near to them, they call the police and the police goes there. So there are some good stories, some success stories in terms of public safety in Brazil, but still they're very small given the challenge we have.
So let's suppose that Lewandowski invites you to become an advisor into the Ministry of Justice and Public Security, and you have to offer 3 suggestions for new changed policies that can improve the situation. What would be the 3 practical things that you would suggest to the Lula government to improve, to address crime and public security?
Federal government will need to create statistics, reliable statistics on crime, on the quantity of crime, and also on clear up rates of crimes. And the minister has to have a monthly meeting with all the secretaries of state discussing those statistics. And it doesn't have to be very public, but it has to be they have to be very effective in building a dialogue with the states and with the federal government helping there to try to meet those standards. When you look for everything, you look for nothing. So we have to choose where organized crime, murders, and violence against women. That's a lot of things to do, and make the states to focus on it. Second thing I would do is to develop a national policy to protect police officers, because this is, in terms of letting them vulnerable to corruption, vulnerable to their lives, vulnerable, which I think this would make the police officers try to work more on to help more to deal with the situation. But police is not enough. And also we have to select which are the key areas where the state has to enter with basic sanitation, with organizing the city. The federal government can put a lot of money for projects that would redesign neighborhoods and areas like Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo and have a lot of presence of criminal gangs. That's what I would do. I think those are the three key issues that we need to address for starting to have a chance of changing this game.
Well, I want to thank you for joining us today on Brazil Unfiltered. This has really been a very informative interview.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. I quite like the conversation. I hope our listeners like it too.
I hope you all have enjoyed the interview today. If you are watching on YouTube, don't forget to like the video. And if you have not yet subscribed, please do so. If you are listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast, please leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people find the program. Have a great week. Until next time, até a próxima.